The smoke alarm's piercing shriek cut through my sleep at 3:17 a.m. I bolted upright in bed, immediately hit by the acrid smell of burning plastic and something far worse. Orange light danced across my bedroom wall, not from the street lamp outside, but from flames that shouldn't exist in my apartment. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, and in that moment of pure terror, I made a decision that would reveal the true nature of my family forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The apartment building on Maple Street had always been a tinderbox waiting to happen. Built in 1962, it housed 24 units across 3 floors, and I'd been living in 2B for the past 18 months. The rent was cheap enough for a graduate student's budget, and the location in downtown Phoenix was perfect for my internship at the Children's Hospital. What I didn't know that Tuesday night was how quickly everything could change. I'd fallen asleep around midnight after a particularly exhausting shift in the pediatric ward. 12 hours of comforting scared kids and their equally terrified parents had drained me completely. My scrubs were still crumpled in a heap by my dresser, and my nursing textbooks lay scattered across the kitchen table where I'd been studying for my upcoming boards. The smoke alarm scream yanked me from a deep sleep. For a few disoriented seconds, I thought it might be a neighbor's cooking gone wrong again. Mrs. Chen in 2A had a habit of burning her late-night stir-fries. But then I smelled it. Not just smoke, but the distinct chemical burn of melting vinyl and the sickly sweet scent of something organic burning, something that made my stomach turn. I stumbled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. The orange glow I'd noticed wasn't coming from outside at all. It was seeping under my bedroom door from somewhere inside my own apartment. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed my palm against the door. Hot. Dangerously hot. Training kicked in from my CPR certification classes. Stay low. Don't open doors that are hot. Find another exit. But I was on the 2nd floor, and my fire escape was on the other side of my living room, the same living room where the orange light was growing brighter by the second. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it twice. The screen showed 3:17 a.m. in harsh white numbers. I needed help, and I needed it immediately. My first instinct was to call 911, obviously, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the flames seemed to be contained to one area, or maybe it was the desperate need to reach out to someone who knew me, someone who could offer more than just emergency protocol. In that moment of panic, all I wanted was to hear a familiar voice telling me everything would be okay. So instead of dialing 911 first, I opened my messages and typed out a text to my older sister, Rebecca. Kitchen on fire, can't get to the front door, trapped in the bedroom, I need help now. Rebecca lived only 15 minutes away in Scottsdale. We'd grown up together in this same city, survived our parents' messy divorce when I was 12 and she was 16. She'd been the one to help me move into this apartment, the one who'd insisted I keep emergency numbers taped to my refrigerator. She was always the practical one, the problem solver, the sister who had her life together while I was still figuring mine out. I hit send and immediately started dialing 911 with shaking fingers. But before I could complete the call, my phone buzzed with Rebecca's response. I looked down, expecting words of comfort, maybe panic, certainly some kind of urgent concern for my safety. Instead, I saw 4 words that stopped my world completely. Not my problem, Jenna. I stared at the screen, certain I'd misread it. The orange glow under my door was getting brighter, and I could hear what sounded like crackling now, like newspapers being crushed. The smoke was getting thicker, starting to seep under the door despite my efforts to block it with a towel. I read the message again. Not my problem, Jenna. No concern, no questions about whether I was safe, no offer to call for help. Just a cold, dismissive response that hit me harder than the smoke burning my lungs. My fingers moved automatically as I typed back. I'm serious. There's a fire in my apartment. I might not make it out. The response came back even faster this time. Drama queen, handle your own mess. That's when something inside me cracked. Not just from fear of the fire, though the danger was becoming more real by the minute. The crackling had turned into a roar, and I could see actual flames licking around the edges of my bedroom door. But what broke me was the realization that my own sister, the person I'd counted on my entire life, the one who'd promised to always be there for me, thought I was lying about a life-threatening emergency. I finally dialed 911, my voice barely a whisper when the operator answered. "There's a fire in my apartment, 847 Maple Street, Unit 2B. I'm trapped in my bedroom." The operator's voice was calm and professional, a stark contrast to my sister's coldness. "The fire department is on the way. Can you get to a window?" I stumbled across my small bedroom to the single window that faced the parking lot. It was old and stubborn, painted shut by decades of maintenance shortcuts. I struggled with the latch, my eyes streaming from the smoke that was now pouring under my door in gray billows. "The window won't open," I gasped into the phone. "Keep trying. Help is coming. Stay on the line with me." Through the window, I could see the parking lot below. It wasn't a long drop, maybe 12 feet, but the ground was concrete. If I could just get the window open, maybe I could lower myself down somehow. I looked around my room desperately. My dresser was too heavy to move, but maybe if I could pile some clothes together, create some kind of cushion. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance. But even as help was coming, even as I was about to be rescued, I couldn't stop thinking about those 8 words on my phone screen. "Not my problem, Jenna," and "handle your own mess." From the sister who'd helped me practice for my driver's test, who'd stayed up all night with me when our parents were fighting, who'd co-signed my student loans when the bank said my credit wasn't good enough on its own. The firefighters' voices echoed in the hallway outside my apartment, heavy boots on the stairs, professional shouts coordinating their approach. I heard my front door being forced open, the crash of wood splintering. Within minutes, they were at my bedroom door. "Phoenix Fire Department, is anyone there?" "Yes, I'm here. I can't open the door." "Step away from the door. We're coming in." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and a rush of superheated air. 2 firefighters in full gear appeared through the smoke like guardian angels. One of them scooped me up without ceremony, while the other cleared a path through what remained of my living room. I caught a glimpse of the damage as they carried me out. The fire had started in my kitchen. Later, I'd learn it was an electrical fault in the 40-year-old wiring behind my refrigerator. The flames had consumed my small dining area and were working their way toward the front door when the firefighters arrived. If I'd tried to escape through the living room, I would have walked straight into the worst of it. Outside in the parking lot, wrapped in a Red Cross blanket and breathing oxygen from a mask, I watched my home burn. Other residents stood around in their pajamas and robes, most of them looking as shocked as I felt. Mrs. Chen approached me with tears in her eyes, asking if I was okay, if there was anyone she could call for me. I looked down at my phone, still clutched in my hand. The screen showed Rebecca's messages, still glowing with their casual cruelty. Below them was a new message that had come in while I was being rescued. "Stop being so dramatic. It's probably just a kitchen fire. Deal with it." Mrs. Chen noticed me staring at the phone. "Family?" she asked, gently. I nodded, unable to speak. "They must be so worried about you." I looked up at my apartment windows, now dark except for the flashlights of the firefighters still working inside. Everything I owned was either burned or water damaged. My nursing textbooks, my uniforms, my photos from college, the quilt my grandmother had made me before she died. All of it gone or ruined. But somehow, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that when I'd needed my sister most, when I'd faced a genuine life-or-death situation, she'd not only refused to help, but had actively dismissed my fear and pain. The worst part was realizing that the person I'd trusted above all others saw my emergency as nothing more than an inconvenience to be brushed off. As the fire chief approached to ask me some questions about how the fire might have started, I made a decision. I turned off my phone and slipped it into the pocket of the hospital scrubs a paramedic had brought me to replace my smoke-damaged pajamas. Whatever came next, insurance claims, finding a new place to live, replacing everything I'd lost, I would handle it myself. Because I was learning in the most painful way possible that sometimes the people who should care about you the most are the ones who will let you burn. The Red Cross put me up in a motel on the outskirts of Phoenix for 3 nights. The Desert Palms Inn wasn't exactly luxurious. Thin walls, a heater that clanked like a ghost in chains, and a carpet that had seen better decades. But it was a shelter, and after what I'd been through, I was grateful for anything with 4 walls and a working smoke detector. I spent those first 72 hours in a strange bubble of numbness. During the day, I dealt with the practical aftermath. Insurance adjusters who spoke in careful, measured tones about coverage limitations and depreciated values. The property manager, Mr. Valdez, who seemed genuinely sorry about the electrical issues, but kept mentioning liability waivers I'd signed. A victim services coordinator who handed me pamphlets about trauma counseling and temporary assistance programs. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Everyone was professional, even kind, but there was a detachment to it all, a clinical efficiency that made me feel like I was just another case file to be processed. My nursing program coordinator, Dr. Martinez, was the first person to show genuine concern when I called to explain why I'd missed my clinical rotation. She immediately arranged for me to take a 2-week leave of absence and connected me with the school's emergency fund for displaced students. The relief in her voice when I assured her I was physically unharmed made me realize how serious the situation could have been. "Jenna, honey, things can be replaced," she said over the phone. "You cannot be. Take all the time you need." It struck me that a woman I'd known for less than 2 years cared more about my well-being than my own sister had. On Thursday morning, I was sitting in a Denny's near the motel, picking at a stack of pancakes I'd ordered but couldn't taste, when my phone finally rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, watching it buzz against the sticky Formica tabletop. Part of me wanted to answer, desperate to hear her say she was sorry, that she'd been confused or half asleep when she'd responded so coldly. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, I finally listened to the message. Rebecca's voice was tense, irritated, rather than apologetic. "Jenna, Mom called me asking why you weren't answering her calls. She said something about you being in some kind of emergency. Look, I know you like to exaggerate things, but you're worrying her for no reason. Just call her back and tell her you're fine, okay? This whole victim thing you do is getting old." I played the message twice, each time feeling something harden inside my chest. She still didn't believe me. Even now, days after the fire, she thought I was making it up for attention. Our mother lived in Tucson, 2 hours south. She and Rebecca had always been closer. They had similar personalities, practical and no-nonsense, while I'd inherited our father's tendency toward what they called emotional dramatics. Growing up, whenever I'd come to Rebecca with a problem, she'd often respond with eye rolls and suggestions to stop being so sensitive. But this wasn't sensitivity. This was real, documented, front page of the local newspaper reel. I drove to the Phoenix Public Library that afternoon and used their computers to search for news coverage of the fire. Sure enough, there it was, in the Arizona Republic. Electrical fire displaces residents at downtown apartment complex. The article mentioned that one resident had been rescued by firefighters after becoming trapped in her unit, though they didn't use my name. I printed out the article, along with photos from the scene that showed my blackened window and the smoke damage to the building's exterior. Then I took screenshots of Rebecca's text messages from that night. The evidence was all there, black and white, impossible to dismiss as imagination or exaggeration. But as I sat there in the library, surrounded by the quiet rustle of turning pages and muted keyboard clicks, I realized something important. I didn't want to prove anything to Rebecca anymore. The need to convince her, to make her understand, was fading. What was replacing it was something much more troubling, the growing awareness that this wasn't really about the fire at all. This was about a pattern I'd been ignoring for years. I thought about the time in college when I'd called Rebecca crying because my roommate had been stealing from me. Her response had been to ask what I'd done to provoke it. When I'd gotten food poisoning from a restaurant and ended up in the emergency room, she'd suggested I was being overdramatic about a stomach bug. When my long-term boyfriend had broken up with me via text message after 3 years together, she'd told me I should have seen it coming and that my clinginess had probably driven him away. In every crisis, every moment when I'd reached out for support, Rebecca had found a way to make it my fault or dismiss it entirely. I'd always told myself she was just practical, that she was trying to help me develop resilience. But sitting in that library, I finally saw it for what it really was: a systematic refusal to acknowledge my pain or offer genuine support when I needed it most. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just dealing with the loss of my apartment and possessions. I was grieving the loss of a relationship I thought I could count on, the death of an illusion I'd been carrying around for 26 years. That evening, back in my depressing motel room, I made a list on hotel stationery. Not of things I needed to replace or insurance claims to file, but of every time I'd gone to Rebecca for help and been turned away. The list filled 2 pages, front and back. Some incidents were major, like when I'd been sexually harassed by a professor and she'd suggested I'd misread the situation. Others were smaller, but no less hurtful. Times when she'd forgotten my birthday, canceled plans at the last minute, or simply been too busy to return my calls when I was struggling. Reading through that list was like examining the skeleton of our relationship, and what I saw wasn't pretty. It was one-sided, conditional, and built on the assumption that my problems were always my own fault. The next morning, I called my mother. "Jenna, thank God. Rebecca said you were being dramatic about some emergency, but I was still worried. What happened, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The fire, being trapped, the rescue, Rebecca's messages. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "She said what?" My mother's voice was sharp with disbelief. "She didn't believe me, Mom. Even after I told her I was trapped, she called me a drama queen." Another pause. Then, "Honey, I'm driving up there right now. Give me the address of where you're staying." My mother arrived 3 hours later with a rental truck and a plan. She'd already called her insurance agent to see if her homeowner's policy might provide any additional coverage for my situation. She'd contacted 3 different apartment complexes with available units in safe neighborhoods within my budget. She'd even stopped at Target and bought me a week's worth of basic necessities: toiletries, underwear, a few changes of clothes in my size. As we sat in the motel parking lot going through her carefully organized folder of information and resources, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days: genuine care from a family member. "Why didn't you call me first?" she asked quietly, not accusingly, but with genuine sadness in her voice. I thought about it honestly. Because I was scared you'd react like Rebecca did, that you'd think I was exaggerating or making it up. My mother set down her folder and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Jenna, has Rebecca made you feel like your problems don't matter?" The question hung in the air between us. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever acknowledged what I was starting to see so clearly. "Yeah," I said quietly, "she has." My mother nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd suspected for a while. I've watched her do it for years. I kept hoping she'd grow out of it, that maturity would make her more empathetic. But dismissing your emergency like that? She shook her head. That's not just immaturity anymore. That's cruelty. Hearing my mother say it out loud, calling Rebecca's behavior cruel, was both validating and heartbreaking. It meant I wasn't imagining things or being too sensitive. But it also meant that the sister I'd loved and looked up to for my entire life was someone who was capable of genuine coldness toward me. That night, in a new extended-stay hotel my mother had found that was cleaner and safer than the desert palms, I finally turned my phone back on. There were 17 missed calls from Rebecca and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. The tone had shifted dramatically from dismissive to concerned to angry to panic. The final message, sent just an hour earlier, read, "Mom told me what really happened. We need to talk." I stared at that message for a long time. 3 days earlier, I would have been relieved to see it. I would have called her back immediately, grateful that she finally understood, ready to accept whatever apology she offered. But now, after everything I'd realized about our relationship, after seeing the evidence of years of dismissive treatment laid out so clearly, I felt something different. I felt tired. Tired of being the one to always reach out first, to always forgive, to always make excuses for her behavior. Tired of hoping she'd change, of believing that surely this time would be different. Tired of setting myself up for disappointment by expecting basic human compassion from someone who'd consistently shown me she wasn't capable of providing it. I turned off my phone again and went to sleep, knowing that when I woke up, I'd have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with my sister going forward. I woke up the next morning to find my mother sitting at the small table by the window, already dressed and sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. She'd driven back to Tucson the night before, but had returned early with fresh bagels and what looked like a legal pad covered in her neat handwriting. "Good morning, sweetheart. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I owe you an apology." I sat up in bed, still groggy. For what? For not seeing this sooner, for not protecting you from Rebecca's behavior when you were younger. She set down her coffee and looked directly at me. I always told myself she was just the older sister being tough, helping you develop thick skin. But looking back now, with adult eyes, I failed you, Jenna. I let her treat you poorly because it was easier than confronting it. The admission hung heavy in the morning air. My mother wasn't one for emotional revelations or deep family analysis. She was more like Rebecca in that way, practical, focused on solutions rather than feelings. Hearing her acknowledge years of family dysfunction was both shocking and oddly healing. "What changed your mind?" I asked. She picked up her legal pad. "I spent most of last night writing down every family incident I could remember where Rebecca dismissed or belittled you. The pattern is undeniable, honey. And the fact that she couldn't summon basic human decency when you were literally trapped in a burning building?" She shook her head. "That's not normal sibling rivalry. That's something else entirely." Before I could respond, my phone started ringing. Rebecca again. My mother glanced at the screen, then at me. "You don't have to answer that, but if you do decide to talk to her, remember that you don't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not another chance to hurt you." I let it go to voicemail, but this time I played the message immediately. Rebecca's voice was different now, shaky, almost panicked. "Jenna, please call me back. Mom explained everything, and I messed up. I messed up really badly. I thought you were being dramatic, like always, but you actually could have died. And please just call me. I need to fix this." My mother raised an eyebrow. "Like always?" "That's what she thinks of me," I said quietly, "that I'm always being dramatic." Well, she's about to learn differently. Before I could ask what she meant, there was a firm knock on the hotel room door. My mother's expression suggested she'd been expecting this. "That would be Rebecca. I told her where you were staying." My heart jumped. "You what?" "Relax. I also told her she had exactly 10 minutes to say whatever she needed to say, and then she was leaving. Whether you forgive her or not is entirely up to you, but she's going to hear some truths first." I wasn't ready for this confrontation, but apparently it was happening anyway. My mother opened the door to reveal Rebecca standing in the hallway, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she had no makeup on, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "Jenna," she said, pushing past our mother into the room. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. When Mom told me what really happened, I couldn't believe I'd been so stupid." I stayed sitting on the bed, not trusting myself to stand. Seeing Rebecca in person brought back a flood of conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, and underneath it all, the old familiar desire to make things okay between us. You didn't believe me, I said simply. Even when I told you I might not make it out, you called me a drama queen. Rebecca's face crumpled. I know, and there's no excuse for that. You have to understand, you've cried wolf so many times before. The words hit me like a slap, and I saw my mother stiffen beside the door. Cried wolf? I repeated. When have I ever cried wolf, Rebecca? You know, like when you said Professor Henderson was harassing you, but it turned out he was just being friendly. Or when you claimed your roommate was stealing, but you'd just misplaced things. Or, stop! My mother's voice cut through the room like a blade. Rebecca, stop talking right now. But Rebecca was on a roll, apparently thinking that explaining her reasoning would somehow make it better. She's always been overly sensitive, Mom. You know that. Every little problem becomes a crisis with her. So when she texted about a fire, I thought she was exaggerating some minor kitchen mishap. I watched my mother's face transform into something I'd rarely seen, cold, controlled fury. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, my mother said, her voice deadly quiet. Your sister texted you that she was trapped in a fire and needed help. Your response was to dismiss it as attention-seeking because you've decided, in your infinite wisdom, that she's too emotional? Well, when you put it like that, that's exactly how I'm putting it, because that's exactly what happened. My sister could have died that night. She was rescued by firefighters. Her apartment is uninhabitable. There are news articles about it. And your concern is that she's too sensitive? I could see Rebecca starting to realize how badly she'd misread the situation, but she wasn't ready to fully accept responsibility yet. I didn't know it was real, she said weakly. How was I supposed to know? By believing her, I said, by treating me like a human being whose word has value, by showing basic concern when someone you claim to love says they're in danger. But you do exaggerate things. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. I don't. I never have. What you call exaggeration is me having normal emotional responses to difficult situations. What you call drama is me asking for support when I'm struggling. What you call crying wolf is me trusting you enough to be vulnerable with you. Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, but I kept going. Do you want to know what really happened with Professor Henderson? He was absolutely harassing me. He made inappropriate comments about my body, invited me to his office for private tutoring that had nothing to do with academics, and suggested my grades might improve if I was nicer to him. I reported it to the dean, and he was quietly transferred to another department. But you never bothered to follow up, so you never learned the outcome. I saw something flicker in Rebecca's eyes, the first hint that maybe she'd been wrong. And my roommate was stealing from me. $20 here, a piece of jewelry there. I eventually caught her red-handed taking money from my wallet. She confessed and moved out the next week. But again, you never asked for updates. You just decided I was being paranoid and left it at that. Rebecca sat down heavily in the chair by the window, her confidence clearly shaken. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, my mother said. You decided early on that Jenna was too emotional, too dramatic, and you used that as an excuse to dismiss everything she ever brought to you. Do you have any idea how damaging that's been to her? I looked at Rebecca, this woman I'd looked up to my entire life, and saw her clearly for perhaps the first time. She wasn't malicious or evil. She was just someone who'd convinced herself that caring less made her stronger, that emotional distance was the same thing as emotional maturity. The worst part, I said quietly, is that I started believing you. I started second-guessing myself every time something bad happened to me. I'd think, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe it's not as bad as I think. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Do you know what that does to a person? When the one person who's supposed to have your back consistently tells you that your feelings don't matter? Rebecca was crying now, but I felt oddly detached from her tears. For years, seeing her upset would have immediately triggered my impulse to comfort her, to minimize my own hurt to make her feel better. But that impulse was gone, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea I was doing that to you." "But you were," I said simply. "Every single time I needed you, you found a way to make it my fault or dismiss it entirely. And now, when I faced a genuine life-threatening emergency, your first instinct was to do the same thing." "How do I fix this?" she asked, looking between me and our mother. "Tell me how to fix this." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt something shift inside me. The desperate need for her approval, the ache for her validation, the hope that she might finally understand me, it was all fading away, replaced by something much more peaceful. "I don't think you can," I said softly. "At least, not in the way you mean." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm done trying to convince you to care about me. I'm done hoping you'll change. Done making excuses for your behavior. Done setting myself up to be hurt by expecting basic compassion from someone who's shown me repeatedly that she's not capable of providing it." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the heating unit and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. "So, what does that mean for us?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. I took a deep breath, feeling both sad and strangely liberated. "I think it means we need to accept that we're not as close as I always wanted us to be. And that's okay. We can be polite at family gatherings, exchange birthday cards, keep things surface level and cordial, but I'm not going to keep putting myself in positions where you can hurt me anymore." "Jenna, please. This isn't punishment, Rebecca. This is self-preservation. I deserve to have people in my life who believe me when I'm struggling, who support me when I'm scared, who treat my emotions as valid even if they don't understand them. You've shown me that you're not one of those people, and I'm finally ready to accept that." My mother nodded slowly, and I could see something like pride in her expression. Rebecca sat in that chair for another 5 minutes, crying quietly, occasionally trying to restart the conversation. But there was nothing left to say. The years of accumulated hurt couldn't be undone by a single apology, and the fundamental incompatibility between who I was and who she needed me to be couldn't be resolved by good intentions. Finally, she stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I really am sorry, Jenna. I love you. I know. I love you too. But love isn't enough if it comes without respect." After she left, my mother and I sat in silence for a long time. Eventually, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That couldn't have been easy." It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free. 2 weeks later, I was standing in my new apartment on Central Avenue, a one-bedroom unit in a building constructed in 2018 with proper fire safety systems and sprinkler coverage. The insurance settlement had been less than I'd hoped, but enough to start over. My mother had co-signed the lease, and between her help and the emergency fund from my nursing program, I'd managed to secure a place that actually felt safer than my old apartment had ever been. The space was completely empty except for an air mattress, a folding chair, and 3 cardboard boxes containing the few salvageable items I'd recovered from the fire. Standing there in that echoing emptiness should have felt depressing, but instead it felt like possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I was building a living space without any input from Rebecca, without worrying about her judgments or criticisms. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "Ready to come back Monday? We've got a particularly challenging pediatric case that could use your touch." I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely, looking forward to it." The past 2 weeks had been a strange mix of practical necessities and emotional processing. I'd spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, furniture stores, and utility companies, slowly rebuilding the infrastructure of my life. But I'd also spent time thinking about the kind of person I wanted to be moving forward, free from the constant weight of Rebecca's disapproval. There had been other texts from Rebecca during those 2 weeks, not daily, but frequent enough to remind me she existed. They started apologetic and gradually shifted to frustrated as I continued not responding. The most recent one, sent 3 days earlier, had been particularly telling. I get that you're mad, but this silent treatment is really immature. We're family. We need to work through this. Even in her attempt at reconciliation, she couldn't resist calling me immature for setting boundaries. It was almost funny how predictable she'd become once I'd started paying attention to the patterns. My mother, on the other hand, had been a revelation. After years of staying neutral in conflicts between Rebecca and me, she'd become an unexpected ally. She'd helped me shop for essentials, offering opinions only when asked, and respecting my choices even when they differed from what she would have chosen. More importantly, she'd started sharing stories about her own relationship with her sister, my Aunt Carol, who had exhibited similar dismissive behaviors until my mother had finally limited contact. I should have recognized the pattern sooner, she'd admitted during one of our shopping trips. I lived through the same thing with Carol. The constant minimizing, the way she made every conversation about how I was too sensitive or dramatic. It took me until I was 40 to realize that wasn't normal sisterly teasing. As I stood in my empty apartment that Saturday afternoon, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Rebecca showing up unannounced. But the knock that came was gentle, almost hesitant. "Jenna, it's Mrs. Chen." I opened the door to find my former neighbor holding a covered casserole dish and looking somewhat embarrassed. "I hope you don't mind me tracking you down. Your mother gave me your new address when I asked. I wanted to bring you something for your new place." Mrs. Chen had been one of the kindest people in my old building, always checking on neighbors and organizing little community events in the shared courtyard. Seeing her familiar face was unexpectedly comforting. "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside, "though I'm afraid I don't have anywhere to sit yet." She laughed as she entered, looking around the sparse space. I remember my first apartment after my divorce. Nothing but a sleeping bag and a hot plate for 3 months. But you know what? It was mine, and that mattered more than any furniture. We sat on the floor near the window, sharing her homemade vegetable lasagna straight from the casserole dish with plastic forks she'd thoughtfully brought along. "How are you really doing?" she asked, after we'd eaten in comfortable silence for a while. It was the first time anyone had asked me that question without an agenda behind it. Not checking to see if I was okay enough to come back to work, or stable enough to handle apartment hunting, or ready to forgive family members. Just genuine curiosity about my well-being. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. Scared sometimes, but also relieved. Does that make sense? Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. After my husband died, people kept telling me I must be devastated. And I was sad, of course, but I was also relieved that I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore and didn't have to constantly worry about setting him off. Grief and relief can exist at the same time. Her words hit me with unexpected force. I hadn't thought of what I was feeling as grief, but that's exactly what it was. I was mourning the sister relationship I'd always wanted but never actually had. And yes, I was also relieved to stop pretending that relationship existed. "There was someone," I said carefully, "someone in my family who didn't handle the fire situation well. And I've been realizing that it wasn't just about the fire. It was about years of feeling like my problems didn't matter to them." Mrs. Chen set down her fork and gave me her full attention. "What did you decide to do about it?" "I stopped trying to fix it, stopped hoping they'd change, started protecting myself instead." "Good for you," she said firmly. "Some people think family means putting up with any behavior because you share blood. But family should be the people who make you feel safe, not the people you need protection from." After Mrs. Chen left, I found myself thinking about the life I wanted to build in this new space. Not just the physical elements, furniture and decorations and a proper kitchen setup, but the emotional landscape I wanted to cultivate. I wanted relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. I wanted to surround myself with people who believed me when I spoke, who supported me when I struggled, who celebrated my successes without finding ways to diminish them. The next morning, I got a text from someone unexpected, Tyler, a fellow nursing student I'd worked with on several clinical rotations. We'd always gotten along well, but had never socialized outside of school. Hey, heard through the grapevine about your apartment fire. That's terrifying. Hope you're doing okay. A bunch of us are going hiking at South Mountain this afternoon. If you want to join, no pressure, just thought you might want to get out and do something normal. I stared at the message for a long time. This was exactly the kind of genuine concern and inclusion I'd been craving. No judgment, no dismissal, just a simple acknowledgement of what I'd been through and an invitation to connect. I typed back, "I'd love to join you. Thanks for thinking of me." The hike turned out to be exactly what I needed. 6 nursing students, all of us stressed about upcoming board exams and clinical requirements, spent a Sunday afternoon climbing trails and complaining about particularly difficult professors. Nobody treated me like a victim or a tragic figure. Tyler had clearly told the group about my situation beforehand because they all expressed appropriate concern and offers of help, but then we moved on to normal conversation. It struck me during that hike how different this felt from interactions with Rebecca. These people listened when I spoke, laughed at my jokes, and included me in group decisions about which trail to take. They treated me like an equal whose opinions and feelings mattered. It was such a basic level of respect that I almost cried, realizing how long I'd gone without it from my own sister. On the drive home, Tyler and I ended up talking alone when he offered to drop me off at my apartment. "Can I ask you something?" he said as we sat in his car outside my building. "And feel free to tell me it's none of my business." "Sure. Dr. Martinez mentioned that you've been dealing with some family stuff on top of the fire. Are you okay on that front?" I looked at this person who barely knew me, showing more genuine concern than my sister had managed in 26 years. "I'm learning that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept that certain people aren't capable of being what you need them to be," I said, "even if they're family." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "My brother's an addict. Took me years to accept that I couldn't love him into sobriety, couldn't force him to care about how his choices affected the rest of us. Setting boundaries with family is brutal, but sometimes it's the only way to save yourself." "Exactly," I said, feeling understood in a way I hadn't expected. "It's not about being mean or holding grudges. It's about protecting your own mental health." As I walked up to my apartment that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine optimism about the future. Not because everything was perfect or because all my problems were solved, but because I was finally making choices based on what I needed rather than what other people expected from me. I spent that evening sitting on my air mattress, making lists of the kind of life I wanted to build. Graduate nursing school with honors, develop friendships with people who treated me as an equal, maybe even consider dating again once I feel more stable, travel somewhere I'd always wanted to go, learn to cook something besides pasta and sandwiches. None of these plans included Rebecca, and for the first time, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. My phone buzzed with another text from her. "Mom says you're doing well in your new place. I'm glad. I still hope we can talk soon." I looked at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. Some chapters in your life end not with dramatic confrontations or angry words, but with the quiet decision to turn the page and start writing something new. And that's exactly what I was doing. 3 months after the fire, I passed my nursing boards on the first try. The celebration was small but perfect. My mother, Tyler, Mrs. Chen, and 3 other classmates at a Mexican restaurant near campus. We ordered too much food and laughed until my cheeks hurt, toasting to new careers and bright futures. As I looked around that table at faces that had supported me through one of the most challenging periods of my life, I realized I'd built something I'd never had before, a chosen family. Dr. Martinez had offered me a position in the pediatric unit where I'd done my clinical rotations, and I'd accepted immediately. The attending physician, Dr. Rodriguez, was known for being demanding but fair, and the nursing team had a reputation for collaboration rather than hierarchy. It felt like the perfect place to start my career. My apartment had transformed too, no longer the empty echo chamber it had been, but a cozy space filled with furniture I'd chosen carefully. A comfortable sofa in deep blue fabric, a dining table where I could spread out my continuing education materials, plants by the windows that somehow managed to thrive despite my inexperience with gardening. Every item represented a choice I'd made independently, free from anyone else's opinions or judgments. But the most significant change wasn't in my living situation or career prospects. It was in how I responded to conflict and stress. When challenging situations arose, I no longer immediately questioned whether my reactions were valid or appropriate. I trusted my instincts, sought support when I needed it, and advocated for myself without apologizing. This new confidence was tested sooner than I expected. I was working a particularly difficult shift in the pediatric unit when a 7-year-old named Marcus was admitted with severe burns from a house fire. The parallels to my own experience were unavoidable, but instead of triggering panic or self-doubt, the situation clarified something important for me. Watching this child's family rally around him, his parents taking turns sleeping in his room, his older sister bringing him drawings from school, his grandmother coordinating meal trains for the parents, I saw what healthy family support actually looked like. Marcus's sister Emma reminded me painfully of what I'd once hoped Rebecca could be. She was 13, dealing with her own trauma from nearly losing her little brother, but her concern for Marcus was genuine and unwavering. When he cried from pain, she held his hand. When he was scared about the scarring on his arms, she showed him photos of burn survivors who'd gone on to live amazing lives. When the doctors needed to explain complicated procedures, she asked thoughtful questions to help Marcus understand. "She's been incredible through all of this," Marcus's mother told me during one of my medication rounds. "I don't know what we would have done without her. She's been his biggest advocate." Watching Emma's natural protectiveness toward her younger brother highlighted exactly what had been missing in my relationship with Rebecca. Not perfection or constant agreement, but basic loyalty and the instinct to support rather than minimize. It was during Marcus's second week in the hospital that Rebecca made her most significant attempt at reconciliation. She showed up at the hospital during my shift, somehow having discovered where I worked. I was charting at the nurse's station when I looked up and saw her standing uncertainly by the elevators, clearly out of place in her business suit among the scrubs and medical equipment. My first instinct was the old familiar anxiety, worry about making a scene, fear of confrontation, the automatic impulse to smooth things over. But that instinct was quickly replaced by something steadier, irritation that she'd invaded my workplace and put me in an uncomfortable position. I approached her calmly. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you. You won't return my calls or texts, and I thought maybe if we could just talk face to face." "This is my workplace," I said quietly but firmly. "This isn't appropriate." "5 minutes," she said, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. "Just give me 5 minutes to explain." I looked around the busy unit, doctors consulting with families, nurses managing complex medication schedules, children dealing with serious illnesses and injuries. The idea of bringing personal drama into this environment felt almost offensive. "No," I said simply. "Not here, not now. You need to leave." "Jenna, please. I've been seeing a therapist. I'm trying to understand why I reacted the way I did. I'm working on myself." Part of me wanted to be proud of her for seeking help, but a larger part recognized this as another manipulation tactic. Rebecca had always been skilled at finding ways to make her problems become my responsibility to solve. "That's good," I said genuinely. "I hope therapy helps you. But it doesn't change anything between us." "How can you say that? If I'm willing to change, to do the work?" "Because this isn't about you changing for me," I interrupted, keeping my voice low to avoid attracting attention from colleagues. "This is about me choosing relationships that are healthy for me. The fact that you would show up at my job, put me in this position, disrupt my workplace, it proves you still don't understand boundaries." I could see her processing this, the realization that her grand gesture wasn't having the effect she'd intended. "I just want my sister back," she said, and for the first time, her voice broke slightly. The words hit harder than I'd expected. For a moment, I felt the old pull to comfort her, to prioritize her feelings over my own boundaries. But then I remembered Marcus's family, Tyler's easy friendship, Mrs. Chen's unconditional support. I remembered what healthy relationships actually felt like. The sister you want back never existed, Rebecca. You want the version of me who absorbed your criticism without complaint, who prioritized your comfort over my own well-being, who made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I'm not that person anymore. That's not, she started, but I held up a hand. I need you to leave now. If you want to work on yourself, that's wonderful, but do it for yourself, not because you think it will earn you access to me again. I watched her walk back to the elevators, her shoulders set in the rigid line I remembered from childhood whenever she didn't get her way. But this time, instead of feeling guilty for disappointing her, I felt proud of myself for maintaining my boundaries even in a difficult moment. Dr. Rodriguez approached me a few minutes later. "Everything okay? I noticed you talking with someone who seemed upset." "Family situation," I said simply. "It's handled." He nodded without pressing for details. "Good. Marcus has been asking for you, by the way. I think you're his favorite nurse." Walking into Marcus's room, I found him awake and alert for the first time in days. His sister Emma was reading him a story, doing different voices for each character in a way that made him giggle despite his pain. "Nurse Jenna," he called out when he saw me. "Emma's reading me the dragon book. Do you want to hear?" "I'd love to," I said, settling into the chair beside his bed. As Emma continued the story, I found myself thinking about the different ways people show love. Rebecca had always claimed to love me, but her version of love came with conditions and requirements. It demanded that I change myself to fit her expectations, that I minimize my needs to accommodate her comfort level, that I accept her dismissal of my feelings as somehow beneficial for my growth. But watching Emma with Marcus, I saw love that was protective rather than critical, supportive rather than conditional. Love that said, "I believe you," instead of "you're too sensitive." Love that showed up consistently, especially during difficult times. That evening, after my shift ended, I found myself walking through the hospital parking garage thinking about the conversation with Rebecca. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if I should give her credit for trying to make amends. But then I remembered something my mother had said weeks earlier. Actions prove who someone is. Words prove who they want you to think they are. Rebecca's actions, showing up at my workplace, disregarding my clearly stated boundaries, attempting to make her therapy journey about fixing our relationship rather than fixing herself, proved that she still viewed me as someone whose boundaries were optional, whose needs were secondary to her agenda. I drove home to my quiet apartment, made myself dinner for one, and settled in with a nursing journal to read about new pediatric pain management techniques. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. Independence wasn't scary. It was empowering. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Movie night this weekend? Sarah found this terrible horror film from the 80s that's supposed to be hilariously bad." I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely. I'll bring popcorn." These were the relationships I wanted to nurture now. Friendships built on mutual respect and genuine enjoyment of each other's company. People who invited me to participate in their lives without requiring me to perform a specific version of myself to earn the privilege. As I got ready for bed that night, I realized that Rebecca's visit to the hospital had been a gift of sorts. It had shown me how much I'd grown, how solid my boundaries had become, how clearly I could now distinguish between healthy and unhealthy relationship dynamics. 6 months ago, I would have been devastated by the idea of permanently limiting contact with my sister. Now, I felt nothing but gratitude for the clarity that allowed me to protect my own peace. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refusing to participate in relationships that consistently diminish you. And for the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself first. 1 year after the fire, I stood in the pediatric unit break room reading a letter that had arrived at the hospital addressed to me. The return address showed Rebecca's name, but instead of her usual Phoenix address, it listed a location in Denver. She'd moved, apparently, without telling anyone in the family. The letter was different from her previous attempts at contact. No dramatic apologies, no promises to change, no demands for reconciliation. Instead, it was a simple acknowledgement. Jenna, I've been in therapy for 8 months now, and I'm starting to understand the damage I caused in our relationship. My therapist helped me see that my need to dismiss your emotions came from my own inability to handle difficult feelings. I made you responsible for managing my discomfort with vulnerability, and that was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for another chance. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I put you through, and I'm sorry. I hope you're building the life you deserve. Rebecca. I read the letter twice, surprised by the absence of any agenda beyond accountability. No requests for phone calls, no suggestions for family therapy, no hints about wanting to repair things. Just an apology without conditions attached. Dr. Rodriguez found me in the break room a few minutes later. Good news or bad news? He asked, noticing the letter in my hands. Honestly, I'm not sure yet, I said, folding the letter and tucking it into my pocket. But it's definitely closure. The timing felt significant. Earlier that morning, I'd received confirmation that I'd been accepted into the pediatric trauma nursing certification program I'd applied for. The specialized training would make me one of only 12 nurses in Arizona qualified to handle the most critical pediatric emergency cases. It was exactly the career advancement I'd been working toward. More importantly, Marcus had been discharged 2 weeks earlier, fully healed and thriving. His family had thrown a celebration party at their house and invited the entire nursing team that had cared for him. Watching him run around his backyard with Emma and their cousins, showing off his healed arms with pride rather than shame, had been one of the most rewarding moments of my career. He keeps talking about becoming a firefighter when he grows up, Emma had told me at the party. Says he wants to help other kids the way the firefighters helped him. The parallel to my own experience wasn't lost on me. Both Marcus and I had survived fires that could have killed us. But while his family had surrounded him with love and support that helped him transform trauma into purpose, I'd had to learn to provide that support for myself. That evening, I met my mother for dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Over the past year, our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had expected. Without the buffer of Rebecca between us, we'd been forced to get to know each other as adults, and the result had been surprisingly rewarding. You got a letter from Rebecca today, I told her over appetizers. My mother's eyebrows rose. Oh, how do you feel about that? It was such a different response than I would have gotten a year ago. No immediate worry about family harmony, no suggestions that I should be grateful for any contact from Rebecca, no pressure to forgive and forget. Just genuine curiosity about my emotional response. Relieved, actually. She's finally taking responsibility without making it about what she wants for me. It feels like the first honest thing she said to me in years. That's growth, my mother said approvingly, for both of you. We talked about my certification program, about her plans to retire early and travel, about the book club she joined where she was making friends for the first time since my father had left. The conversation was easy, natural, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I have something to tell you, she said as we were finishing dessert. I've been seeing someone. I looked up, surprised. My mother hadn't dated anyone seriously since the divorce 15 years earlier. His name is Frank. He's a retired teacher, volunteers at the animal shelter where I've been fostering dogs. We've been taking things very slowly, but, she smiled, looking younger than I'd seen her in years. He's kind, Jenna, really genuinely kind. He listens when I talk, remembers things that matter to me, never makes me feel like my feelings are too much or not enough. That's wonderful, Mom. I'm happy for you. The reason I'm telling you is that he's taught me something important about relationships. He's shown me what it looks like when someone consistently chooses to treat you with respect and care. And it's made me realize how rare that actually is. How much we all settle for relationships that don't serve us because we think it's normal. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You were right to protect yourself from Rebecca. I see that now. Sometimes love means knowing when to walk away. Later that night, I sat in my living room with Tyler and Sarah, watching another one of our terrible movie selections while working on a jigsaw puzzle Sarah had brought over. These Sunday evening gatherings had become a regular tradition, a low-key way to decompress after difficult hospital shifts. I got a letter from my sister today, I mentioned during a particularly ridiculous scene involving a zombie apocalypse caused by contaminated pizza. The one who dismissed your apartment fire? Sarah asked, not looking up from the puzzle pieces she was sorting. That's the one. She actually apologized, like really apologized, without trying to get anything from me. Tyler paused the movie. How do you feel about that? It was the same question my mother had asked, and I found myself giving the same answer. Relieved. It feels like the end of something rather than the beginning of something, if that makes sense. Perfect sense, Sarah said. Some apologies are about trying to restart a relationship. Others are about letting someone go with dignity. Sounds like she finally figured out which kind you needed. We went back to our movie and puzzle, the conversation flowing naturally to other topics. But as I watched these friends who'd shown up consistently in my life over the past year, I felt grateful for the long journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months later, I was selected as the lead nurse for a new pediatric trauma response team the hospital was launching. The position came with additional responsibilities, a significant raise, and the opportunity to mentor new nurses coming into the field. During my interview, the chief of pediatrics had specifically mentioned my ability to connect with both patients and families during crisis situations. You have an unusual combination of technical skill and emotional intelligence, she'd said. Patients trust you because you make them feel heard and believed. That's not something we can teach. I thought about her words as I prepared for my first day in the new role. The ability to make people feel heard and believed had come at a high personal cost, learned through experiencing the opposite from someone who should have provided it naturally. But like Marcus turning his trauma into motivation to help others, I'd found a way to transform my pain into purpose. My phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from my chosen family: Tyler, Sarah, Mrs. Chen, my mother, even some of my former classmates who'd heard about the promotion. But there was nothing from Rebecca, and for the first time, that absence felt appropriate rather than hurtful. Some relationships are meant to last forever, growing and adapting through all of life's changes. Others serve their purpose for a season and then naturally fade. And some, like mine with Rebecca, require conscious endings to protect everyone involved. Standing in my apartment that night, looking at the life I'd built entirely on my own terms, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace with my choices. The fire that had nearly killed me had ultimately saved me, forcing me to confront truths I might have spent years avoiding. I'd learned that family isn't just about shared DNA, but about who shows up when you need them most. I'd discovered that respect is more important than love in any relationship. Most importantly, I'd realized that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. The apartment where I'd once texted desperately for help and received coldness in return was now just a memory. In its place was a life filled with people who believed me when I spoke, supported me when I struggled, and celebrated my successes without finding ways to diminish them. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering that the person you thought you needed to keep happy was never going to be happy anyway. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them figure that out on their own while you build something beautiful without them. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I thought about the scared young woman who'd been trapped in that burning apartment a year and a half ago. She'd been hoping for rescue from someone who'd already decided she wasn't worth saving. But she'd saved herself, and that had made all the difference. 3 years after the fire, I was featured on the cover of Arizona Healthcare magazine as one of the state's top 30 under 30 healthcare professionals. The article highlighted my work developing new protocols for pediatric trauma response and my research on family communication during medical crises. But what meant the most to me was a quote they included from Dr. Rodriguez. Jenna doesn't just treat patients, she creates an environment where families feel safe to be vulnerable, knowing they'll be believed and supported. The irony wasn't lost on me that my greatest professional strength had been forged in the crucible of my greatest personal weakness. Years of having my emotions dismissed had taught me to recognize when others were struggling to be heard, and my experience with family crisis had shown me exactly what not to do when someone reached out for help. I was reviewing applications for our nursing mentorship program when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Jenna, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." My heart skipped, wondering if Rebecca had decided to make another unannounced appearance. But when I walked to the lobby, I found Emma instead, Marcus's sister, now 16 and nearly as tall as me. "Emma, what a wonderful surprise. How's Marcus?" Her face lit up. "He's amazing. Actually, that's why I'm here." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of Marcus in a junior firefighter uniform, grinning beside a fire truck. He just started the youth program with Phoenix Fire Department. He's been talking about it for 2 years, ever since he got out of the hospital. I felt tears prick my eyes looking at the photo. The scared 7-year-old I'd helped care for had grown into a confident 10-year-old who'd transformed his trauma into purpose. "But that's not the only reason I came," Emma continued. "I'm applying to nursing schools next year, and I was hoping you'd write me a recommendation letter." "Of course, I'd be honored. What made you choose nursing?" Emma's expression became serious, mature beyond her 16 years. "Watching how you and the other nurses took care of Marcus, but also how you took care of our whole family. You never made us feel stupid for being scared or dramatic for crying. You just believed us when we said something was wrong, and you helped us figure out how to handle it." Her words hit me with unexpected force. This teenager had articulated something I'd spent years learning about myself: the power of simply believing someone's experience and offering support without judgment. "You're going to be an incredible nurse," I told her. "I can already see it." After Emma left, I found myself thinking about the ripple effects of the choices we make during crisis moments. Marcus's family's response to his trauma had helped him become someone who wanted to save others. My decision to protect myself from Rebecca's dismissiveness had led me to become someone who made sure others felt heard and valued. But what would have happened if Rebecca had responded differently that night? If she'd shown up at my door instead of sending cold texts? If she'd called 911 herself while rushing to help me? Would I have learned the same lessons about self-advocacy and healthy boundaries? Would I have developed the same instinct to protect others from feeling dismissed and alone? The questions felt academic now, but they reminded me that every crisis is also an opportunity for growth, for clarity, for choosing who we want to become. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Emergency department is crazy today. Any chance the trauma team can spare you for a consult? We've got a scared kid who won't talk to anyone." I grabbed my badge and headed downstairs, finding Tyler in the pediatric emergency bay with a 9-year-old girl named Sophia, whose parents spoke limited English. She'd been in a car accident and needed stitches, but she was too frightened to let anyone examine her properly. "Hey, Sophia," I said, kneeling down to her eye level. "I'm Jenna. I heard you're feeling scared, and that makes perfect sense. Car accidents are really frightening." She looked at me with huge dark eyes, clutching a stuffed elephant that had clearly seen better days. "This is Mr. Peanuts," she said quietly, holding up the elephant. "He was in the car too. He's scared." "Well, we definitely need to take good care of Mr. Peanuts then," I said seriously. "Can you tell me what would help him feel safer?" Over the next 20 minutes, I helped Sophia and Mr. Peanuts navigate the medical examination, explaining each step, validating her fears, and making sure she felt in control of the process. Her parents watched with relief as their daughter gradually relaxed, trusting that her concerns were being taken seriously. "Thank you," her mother said to me in careful English as we finished. She believes you." Watching Sophia leave with her family, walking steadily on her own and clutching Mr. Peanuts close, I thought about the different ways we learn to trust or distrust others. Sophia's parents had raised her to believe that her feelings mattered, that adults would listen when she expressed fear or pain. That foundation of trust made it possible for her to accept help when she needed it. I'd had to learn that lesson much later in life and much more painfully. That evening, I attended the retirement party for Mrs. Chen, who was moving to California to be closer to her grandchildren. The community center was packed with neighbors from our old apartment building, and I was surprised by how many people I remembered despite having lived there for such a short time. "I always wondered what happened to you after the fire," said Mr. Valdez, the property manager. That night was terrifying for all of us, but seeing you come out safely, it reminded everyone how quickly life can change. Several other former neighbors shared similar sentiments. The fire had affected the entire building community, making everyone more conscious of safety, more appreciative of their relationships, more aware of how much they depended on each other. You started something that night, Mrs. Chen told me as the party was winding down. People began checking on each other more, looking out for signs of trouble. Mrs. Patterson in 3A told me you probably saved her life too, because after seeing what happened to you, she finally got her chest pains checked out. Turned out to be a heart condition that needed immediate treatment. I'd never known about Mrs. Patterson or the other ways that night had impacted people. It struck me that trauma rarely affects just one person. It ripples outward, touching everyone in the vicinity. But so does healing, and so does the choice to transform pain into protection for others. Driving home that night, I passed the street where my old apartment building stood. On impulse, I turned down Maple Street and parked across from the building. It looked exactly the same, except for new windows in what had been my unit and a fresh coat of paint on the exterior. I sat in my car for a few minutes, remembering that terrified young woman who'd texted her sister for help and been dismissed as dramatic. She'd felt so alone that night, so desperate for someone to believe her and care about her safety. If I could go back and talk to her, I'd tell her that being dismissed by Rebecca was actually a gift, though it wouldn't feel like one for a long time. I'd tell her that the people who truly matter will show up when you need them, and the people who don't show up are revealing something important about themselves, not about you. Most importantly, I'd tell her that she's about to discover she's much stronger than she knows, and that the life she's going to build for herself will be better than anything she could imagine while sitting in that smoke-filled bedroom. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Frank proposed. I said yes. Can't wait to tell you all about it over dinner this weekend." I smiled, remembering how isolated and scared my mother had seemed in the months after the fire, unsure how to navigate the new family dynamics that emerged when I'd set boundaries with Rebecca. Now she was planning a second marriage with someone who treasured her exactly as she was. Everyone in my family had been forced to grow and change because of that night. Even Rebecca, wherever she was in Denver, had apparently done the work to understand her patterns and take responsibility for her actions. But the most important growth had been my own, learning to value myself enough to walk away from relationships that diminished me, to surround myself with people who enhanced my life rather than draining it, to trust my own perceptions and advocate for my own needs. As I drove away from Maple Street for what I knew would be the last time, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the fire that had forced me to see clearly, for the sister whose coldness had taught me to recognize warmth, for the painful lessons that had led me to a life filled with genuine love and respect. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, not because the pain wasn't real, but because you chose to let it teach you rather than defeat you. And sometimes the person who refuses to save you ends up giving you the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to save yourself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.